We've made a VR 360 gallery space, but now I'm going to go over a slightly more advanced and perhaps more elegant approach to making a 360 gallery space using the array modifier. And I'll also go over how to get these kind of rudimentary textures like the wood floor we see here. So to begin with, I have the same space we had before, and I'm going to delete the camera, I'm going to delete the cube, switch to the x-axis, and then I am going to bring in a set of pictures and take these image layers and add them to a new collection. Just call it images. I'm also going to click on this funnel tool up here in the layers and click on this one that looks like a camera looking right at me. I don't know why this isn't on by default, so now I can have an eye just like layers, but this camera actually means whether it will come out in my final render or not. So if I don't see it, I don't want it rendered, especially in this case. We're going to start similarly to how we started before. I'll hit Shift-A, add in the mesh section a cylinder, and I'm going to set this cylinder to 6 sides. I'm going to give it, I'm going to do 6 pictures instead of 5 this time. So before I was really concerned, because I was trying to use as few tools as possible, I was concerned with keeping the walls as close to square as I could so that I could have a square inset and then affect that ratio. We're not going to have to worry about any of that for this approach. So now I just want to set this room to be the size I actually want the room to be. So 2 meters depth, that's a great height for a wall, at least to start. And then the radius, 1 meter wide, you know, it's about 3 feet wide, a very tight room. So I'm just going to crank up the radius to kind of a little more than 3. I'm just going with what looks good to me right here. I am going to leave that default depth, and now I will just click out of there, and there we go. So I will click on the magnet up here for snap. I'll look at my picture from the x-axis. Now I will hit the G key for grab, Z key for only moving on the Z axis, and I'm just going to move it up so it's sitting right on the plane, just like we did before, and then I'll turn off the snap tool right there. Again, similar to how we worked before, I hit tab to go into edit mode. I hit 3 for face selection, and I will select the top face and press P for separate, and I will call that one ceiling, and then I will select the bottom face and hit P again, separate, and I will call this one floor. Always a good idea to name your layers as you go. I'll actually name this original cylinder to walls. And now this is where things start to get a little different. I will hide my walls, I'll keep my walls, I will hide my floor and my ceiling, and holding I'll just press A for select all, and now you can see some of these walls are parallel to the grid and some of them aren't. So right now if I hold this up, the 2 walls on the sides are parallel to the grid, and then the other ones are not. I want to keep one wall and I want it to be parallel to the grid for easier editing. So holding the Shift key, I'll select this one here. So now that wall is deselected. I've selected all but one, and now I will hit the X key and delete faces. So we just have this one wall, which is in the correct space, the correct place in space to become a hexagon again. The next thing I'm going to do while I'm in edit mode, I'm going to select this face again. I'm going to hit the space bar, and I'm going to type in the word cursor. The 3D cursor is this kind of target-like thing here. And I'm going to take this select this option, snap cursor to active. So my cursor is now on this plane. And now I will hit tab and go back into object mode, still in the layout palette. The reason I've moved this cursor is the cursor is where things come into existence. So I will hit Shift A, and this time I'm going to add a cube, and boom, it appears, I should say, right on that point. That's great. I will select outside that cube. Now I want to move that cursor back to this point here, which is actually called the origin. So I will, or the world origin, I should say. So I will hit the spacebar again and type cursor, and now I see object snap cursor to world origin, and I've put it back where it goes. I'm going to add another object. Shift A, but this time I'm not going to add a mesh, I'm going to add an empty. Empties are things that you can see and work with during layout, but that do not render as something you can see when you output your file. So I'm going to put in a plain axis, and I'm going to go ahead and name this now. I'm going to call it important axes, exclamation point. I'll now go to that cube and I'm going to call it picture, because that's where the pictures are going to go. So rather than worrying about ratios, I want to set this picture to be the size that the photograph is in real life. So I'm going to hit N to bring up this menu here, and I can see that the current dimensions of this cube are 2 by 2 by 2 meters. That is definitely not the size of my picture. I sadly think in imperial measurements when I think about the size of pictures, so I am going to select this tab here, which is the cone with the ball and the dot in the background, which is my scene properties. And in my scene properties, I have a tab or a menu for units, and I'm going to change my unit system to imperial. This really is only an essential step if it matters to you personally. You should use whatever units you need. I personally am plagued with thinking about some things in inches and some things in meters, so I find when designing things on a large and small scale, I switch back and forth between them. So having set my units to inches, I will set my Z dimension on this cube, my height, to 40, and my Y dimension, the width, to 30. So my pictures are 30 by 40 inches, and then I will set the depth of this cube, which is on the x-axis. Just for starters, I'm going to set it to 4 inches. So that means because it's on both sides of this plane that it's going to extend 2 inches out. Now there are a lot of things we could do here. We could use a Boolean operation to slice this cube in half and remove this side that's on the back of the wall. We could also union these objects together, but there really isn't any need we have to, and we don't have to do it because we don't really care what the outside of this room looks like. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to try to execute this in as few operations as possible. So I'm going to select this wall again, and going to these tabs along here, oh, I should say before that, we've done a lot of adjustments to these images, and you can see here, if I click on the wall, it has a location relative to the world origin. And if I click on this box, it has some other information here. I want these things to all be reset. I don't want to change these values by clicking on them. Instead, I will select both these objects, and I will press Command A or Control A on Windows, which is apply, and I'm just going to select this option here, all transformations. And you'll see nothing changed with the object, but these numbers are all zeroed out here. So proportionally, this scale is considered to be 1 to 1 to 1. The location is considered to be 0, 0, 0. And that's important because when executing other changes to these objects, we want to just treat them as we see them and not have it refer to how the objects were originally created. We don't care about that. We just care about what they're like now. So I will select the wall, having applied all the transformations. And now along these tabs, I'm going to select the wrench or spanner, which leads us to modifiers. And the modifier that we are going to select here is array. And for starters, it looks like nothing happened, but that's okay. So the array tool can be used to duplicate objects many times throughout a scene. You can typically do it along the X or Z axis. You can move the objects around. We're not going to use any of these functions right now, so I'm going to turn off relative offset. Here for the count, which is how many repeats we're going to make, repetitions we're going to make, I'm going to set it to 6 because we're making a hexagon. Now that I've done that, I will now click this option down here called Object Offset. And opening that little menu, I have this dropper, and I can either select in the space or in my layers, important axis. So now that I've done that, I will click on the important axis. And while we've repeated this image 6 times based on the place and position and rotation of this axis, nothing's happened because it hasn't moved. So if I move it, you can see these walls will follow it wherever it goes. I'll hit escape there. And if I rotate it, you'll see that they move with its rotation. This is quite beautiful and hypnotic to look at. I'm getting lost in it as we speak, but obviously not that useful because we want to remake a hexagon. So rather than fooling around with trying to eyeball the rotation, what I'm going to do is go to this menu here, and here where the rotation is set, I'm going to click on Z, and I'm going to type 360 because there's 360 degrees in a circle, slash for divide, and 6 because I have 6 sides. And now when I click out of that, we have our hexagon. It's not rocket science, or it's not advanced math, I should say, to figure out that 360 divided by 60 is 6, but I like to do it that way with the equations because, you know, if I had 7 sides or 9 sides, well, 9's not that, you know, if I had an unusual number of sides, the math could get more complicated. So I'll just set the precedent now that you can just type the equation directly in there, which is quite handy. So now I'm going to repeat the operation with our picture object. So I'll add a array modifier. I'll set the count to 6. I'm going to turn off relative offset, turn on object offset, and you can see I also have a little menu here, so I'll select it this way this time, important axis. And now, because I've already rotated this axis, these 6 pictures just array themselves perfectly. Now, if I want to make changes to any of these objects, I want to do it in edit mode and not object mode. So you'll see if I move this in object mode, everything kind of drifts in crazy directions, which has to do with the fact that this is kind of, I don't even know exactly how to explain it. It's calculating the difference between the place I'm positioning it and the place it originally was. We don't need that. So if I want to move these around and have them move around evenly, I hit Tab for edit mode, A for select all, and now you can see the whole thing moves, but it stays within the logic that we would expect. So if I were, for instance, to hit G and Z, I can move these pictures up and down in the space, all at the same time. I can also select just one face and hit G and X, and now you can see all these picture planes will extend at the same time. This would be kind of a cool but also claustrophobic and terrifying gallery space. I'll just leave those at 2 inches for now. Going back to object mode, I'll select the wall, I'll hit Tab again, and this time I'm looking at the space. I want to make the ceiling a little taller. So I'm going to press 2 to select an edge. I'm going to select the top edge of my scene. I will hit G and Z and just raise the walls up a little bit. There we go. And my ceiling is going to be low now, but we can deal with that later. So now I will look carefully at this. I will hit tab. So I am going to consider these walls done. And now I'm actually going to apply this modifier. So we're back in object mode. And if you're using Blender 2.8, there's an apply button, very present for reasons I'm not really sure of. The apply button in Blender 2.9 is nested in this drop-down menu. So here we've got these different options of how the array is seen, but here we have that drop-down menu, and here's the option, apply. And we could also just hover over this and press Command A, and that will also apply the setting. So now if I hit tab again and A, we can see that all these sides are here. So this is almost proper, but because we've repeated this square or rectangle or whatever it is around 6 places, it means that for each of these vertical edges, we actually have 2 edges overlapping each other, and that's not really a good topology for mesh. We never want excess points. I'm going to press the 1 key so I can select points, and I'm going to clean up these points in a very simple way. I'll hit A to select all my vertices. I'll hit spacebar, and in the search criteria, and if you don't have spacebar set for search, you would hit F3. I will type merge, and here we have this option, clean up merge by distance. And down here I can see in the bottom corner that it has removed 12 vertices from my scene. Now to test that I've put this object together properly, I'm going to press number 2, so I'm selecting edges again, and I will press option Z for X-ray. I'm going to select all the edges in the scene, and now I'm going to press, or I'll right click and select bevel edges, and I can see that these edges bevel, which means that we have clean edges together. If we have extra points here, you'll see all sorts of artifacts popping up. I'm going to put a tiny bit of bevel here because, as we discussed before, there aren't ever any like true hard angles and things. I find walls look a little more natural if we put a little bevel inside them. If we want to remake the floor with the same bevel, we can do that. I would hit 1, select points again. I would select in this, we're going to call it a circle, even though it's a hexagon with extra points in the corners. We'll call it a loop. I'll select between these points and press Option or Alt and click, and you can see it'll follow this path. And then I would press the F key, and I've created a new floor. I then can switch to face selection by pressing 3. Select this bottom face, press P, and call it new floor. Now, I'm not totally sure if this was a necessary step or not, but I've done it anyway. So back in object mode, I will select my pictures. And I am still keeping these in an array modifier because I'm going to do some stuff with the materials before I apply these as their own actual objects. So I'll turn X-ray mode off and I will go to material view. And now I will set my walls. I'll give them a color. Click on the material tab here, hit new, and I'm going to give these walls kind of greenish, grayish color. I can also sample this from one of my pictures, which is a useful reason to have them in here. So if I show my pictures again, this does look kind of wild. I maybe want my walls to be the same color as this cardboard box, or maybe the same color as this molding in this picture here. So having selected this, I will select the base color again, And this time I'll take this eyedropper and I'll click on the molding over here. Or I could also have them be the color of a wolf skull. Oh, I kind of like that. I'm going to stick with that. So now I'll go ahead and hide all those images again because those are quite distracting. Now, if we want this floor to look like wood, there are great tutorials out there about how to take photographs of a wood floor and turn them into a texture. And in fact, I might make one of my own to go with this, but for now, we want to just make the simplest wood floor we can. And to do that, we need to enable one of the default add-ons. So I'm going to go into Preferences. I'm going to select this option Add-ons, and I'm going to search for Material. And here's this option, Material Library. I already have it checked. By default, this will be unchecked. So you just click that box, and you can even do it while you're working on the file. You don't need to restart Blender or anything like that. And now I've created a new material for the floor, but I'm just going to keep scrolling down. And then here's Material Library, VX. And we have sample materials. You can create your own material libraries too. And right at the bottom, we have this one, wood. I'm just going to use it. So I'll click on wood and I will click apply to select it. And boom, we've got a wood floor. Now, you'll see this wood floor looks pretty tacky. Right now, we're using Eevee, which is the gaming rendering engine. If you don't see anything here, it probably means you're not in material mode. So you want to click on material mode or material view, up here. We can see in render mode, we've got a shadow shining on it. It's looking a little better. And then if we set this to cycles as our rendering engine, you can see it takes a little while to render in, but the floor is looking better. And there are some other floor options in there, so you could probably find something better, but I'm going to stick with this. So now I will switch this back to Eevee for now, because it's faster. Go back to Material View and continue. So we've got our floor, we've got our walls. I'm going to click on these boxes here, set their material. I'm going to go with material 1, which is the same as the wall. And now, for this object, I'm going to add materials for all of our pictures. So I will, well, by the way, here we see this number. I'm just going to click that off so that the material on these boxes don't correspond if we make changes to the material here. So you do that just by clicking on that number. So now I will add some more materials. Create a new material. Here where it says base color, I click on that dot. I go to image texture. I can click on this image and all these will come down quickly. And I'll change this one to number 1. And there we have it. It's calling it material 4. So I'll just rename it to 1. And now I will fast forward as I continue to make these. Okay, so we have set those in. Now I will hit Tab. Sorry, something went wrong here. I will hit, still in material mode, I will hit Tab. I'll hit A, so I can find which one of these squares was the real one. I couldn't remember which it was. And I'll select out of it. I'm going to press 3 to select faces. I'm going to select the front of this rectangle, and I'm going to select material 1 and assign it. And you can see it's put the same picture all around. I'll now press the U key and select unwrap, and our image has somewhat realigned to the picture, but it's still off. It's not really, it's sideways, and it's still a little big. So I click on UV editing, and here we are in the UV editing tab. I will zoom out of this screen here, and I can see that this face is set up improperly with this image. So I will switch to material mode so I can see it, and then hovering over this tab, I'll press A, R, 90, and then G, and I'll center our box, and S to fill it in. Can tweak that around a little bit, scaled it, positioned it, and now our picture looks correct. So I'll go back to layout, and now I'll go to this modifier for this image, and I will apply the array. So I'm hoping we'll see that by setting this image to all these panels, that we'll at least get closer to the correct alignment when we set the textures on these. So I will hit Tab again to get into edit mode, and now you can see I can select everything in here because they're all real objects, and I will go clockwise around the room, starting I guess anywhere. So I'll select this image, I will go to, so I've selected this face that this image is on. Now I'll select image 2, assign it. Oh, we're looking good so far. Select this one, assign texture 3. Select this one, assign texture 4. Select this guy, assign texture 5. And this last one, assign texture 6. So this last picture here is actually a horizontal picture, and because these are boxes, these are their own objects, they're not actually connected to the walls here, it's very easy for me to rotate this picture without changing the dimensions. So I will switch to point mode or vertex select mode by hitting the 1 key. I'll hit Option Z to go into X-ray mode so I can see the whole box. I'll select that box. And I see I might have a little problem here actually. So if I hit R here, you know, this is a crazy rotation. If I hit Y, it's going to rotate it along the world's y-axis. We can't use any standard axes. In order to rotate this on its center axis, I will select the object, select all the points in this object, and then I will hit spacebar. I'll use this option, align view to active. I've chosen active left. Sometimes, depending on where your image is in the space, it can be tricky, and you just have to do trying, you know, align to active left, align to active right, until you're looking straight on it. And now you can see free rotate will just rotate this right along its axis. And I'll just hit 90, and there we are. We could avoid this problem by simply putting a picture that we know is going to be a different orientation than others on one of the walls, one of the two walls that align with one of the world axes. I wanted to actually keep it on an awkward wall because it could be that you have a scene where you want to alternate between horizontal and vertical pictures, and this would give you that control. So selecting the front face on this one, I'll now go to UV editing. And I can see that even though this box looks correct here, I can see in the image that that doesn't look correct at all. So I will rotate. Scene. And selecting here, I might even try unwrapping it again. And now I will rotate. So it looks like we want -90. Enter. Move this to about the middle with G, S for scale. So this one obviously required a lot of special tweaking, but the nice thing about using this array method and setting one of the images to start is that our other images have all popped in with the correct settings because we set them to our first image here. So back in layout mode, from here things will proceed the same as they did before. So if I want to create a baseboard, I can select our floor here. I'm going to temporarily hide the walls so I can see what I'm doing. I'll hit A, and I will bring this up, kind of turning it into a solid. I'll then switch to face selection mode by pressing the number 3. And I'll actually turn off the X-ray for a second so I can easily select the top face, press X, and delete it. So now we've created this kind of little tray here. But you'll notice that the board's texture looks pretty weird on our baseboard to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit A to select all the faces, Shift, and so I'm just Shift and select on the floor. So now I'm just selecting the edges. And now I will add a new material. And I'll go back to this material library and I'll choose this one, Polished Walnut. Apply to selected. And now we have another texture applied there. It looks kind of weird in this view, but it will look all right. So I will put the walls back on. I will hit Tab to go back into object mode. And our baseboards are kind of blended into the wall, so we'll click on the wrench for modifiers, add a solidify modifier. We can bring that thickness so that the board comes into the room, and then tweak the thickness a little bit. I will now select out of that. I'm going to center my light. I'll select my light here in the layer menu. I'll right click on it. I'll go to snap, and I'll snap the selection to the cursor, and then I'll hit G to move it and Z for the Z axis, and I'll move the light up to the middle of the room. I'll add a camera. For the camera, I will set the X rotation to 90, and I'll set the other 2 rotations to 0. And then I will take that camera and, looking from the side, I'll move that up so it's more or less in the middle of the space. The exact position or the exact angle that the camera is pointing is not important because as we did before, we are going to render this as a 360 panorama. So I will select my camera view here so I can see what the camera sees. I will go to camera mode, change that, or I'm sorry, I'll go to render mode, switch to cycles. In the camera mode, we will set that to panoramic, eco-rectangular. And you'll see this is kind of interesting. When I make my ceiling show up, everything is dark because I forgot to reposition the ceiling, so it is still below the light. So in camera mode, I can select ceiling in the layers here. I can hit G to move it and Z for the Z axis, and I'll just move it up until the light comes back. If we wanted to see what I was doing from the outside, you can see there's the ceiling below the light, and there's the ceiling on top of the light. If we hold it up a little bit, we can see the light escaping. That might look interesting. I'm gonna have the ceiling float a little bit above the wall, just for the sake of it. So now back into camera view, we can see we've got our repeating panorama. With the inclusion of the ceiling, the light is quite bright in this space, so I will select my light, go to the light settings in the tab here, and I will first try just cutting it in half, so 500 watts instead of 1000. Put it down to 400, and I'll stick with that. Then in the output tab under render, which looks like a printer, I will I can keep my vertical dimension to 1080 if I want to stick with standard 1080p format. But actually for VR content, often there's a lot of zooming in and out that occurs. So I'm going to multiply that by 2 by putting an asterisk 2. So now we have this number 2160, and on top I'm going to type 2160 and multiply that by 2, and that should give us a nice high resolution 2:1 aspect ratio image. And to render this, I will simply go to render image. I don't have any moving components in this, so I don't need to render it as an animation.